Jawaharlal Nehru, Chapter 3, The Quest, the Panorama of India's Past. During these years of thoughts and activity, my mind has been full of India, trying to understand her and to analyze my own reactions towards her. I went back to my childhood days and tried to remember what I felt like then, what vogue saved this conception took in my growing mind, and how it was molded by fresh experience. Sometimes it receded into the background, but it was always there, slowly changing, a queer mixture derived from old story and legend and modern fact. It produced a sensation of pride in me, as well as that of shame, for I was ashamed of much that I saw around me, of superstitious practices, of outworn ideas, and above all, our subject and poverty stricken state. As I grew up and became engaged in activities which promised to lead to India's freedom, I became obsessed with the thought of India. What was this India that possessed me and beckoned to me continuously, urging me to action so that we might realize some vague but deeply felt desire of our hearts? The initial urge came to me, I suppose, through pride, both individual and national, and the desire common to all men to resist another's domination and have freedom to live the life of our choice. It seemed monstrous to me that a great country like India, with a rich and immemorial past, should be bound hand and foot to a far-away island which imposed its will upon her. It was still more monstrous that this forcible union had resulted in poverty and degradation beyond measure. That was reason enough for me and for others to act. But it was not enough to satisfy the questioning that arose within me. What is this India apart from her physical and geographical aspects? What did she represent in the past? What gave strength to her then? How did she lose that old strength, and has she lost it completely? Does she represent anything vital now apart from being the home of a vast number of human beings? How does she fit into the modern world? These wider international aspects of the problem grew upon me as I realized more and more how isolation was both undesirable and impossible. The future that took shape in my mind was one to intimate cooperation politically, economically, and culturally between India and the other countries of the world. But before the future came, there was the present, and behind the present lay the long and tangled past, out of which the present had grown. So to the past I looked for understanding. India was in my blood, and there was much in her that instinctively thrilled me, and yet I approached her almost as an alien creature, full of dislike for the present as well as for many of the relics of the past that I saw. To some extent, I came to her via the West and looked at her as a friendly Westerner might have done. I was eager and anxious to change her outlook and appearance and give her the grab of modernity, and yet doubts arose within me. Did I know India? I who presumed to scrap much of her past heritage. There was a great deal that had to be scrapped, that must be scrapped, but surely India could not have been what she undoubtedly was, could not have been continued a cultured existence for thousands of years if she had not possessed something very vital and enduring, something that was worthwhile. What was this something? I stood on a mound of Mohenjo-daro in the Indus Valley in the northwest of India. and all around me lay the houses and streets of the ancient city that is said to have existed over 5,000 years ago. And even then, it was an old and well developed civilization. The Indus civilization, writes Professor Childe, represents a very perfect adjustment of human life to a specific environment that can only have resulted from years of the patient effort, and it had endured. It is already specifically Indian and forms the basis of modern Indian culture. Astonishing thought that any culture or civilization should have this continuity for 5 or 6 thousand years or more, and not in a static, unchanging sense, for India was changing and progressing all the time. She was coming into intimate contact with the Persians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Chinese, the Arabs, the Central Asians, and the people of the Mediterranean. But though she influenced them and was influenced by them, her culture basis was strong enough to endure. What was the secret of this strength? Where did it come from? I read her history and read also a part of her abundant ancient literature, and was powerfully impressed by the vigor of the thought, the clarity of the language, and the richness of the mind that lay behind it. I journeyed through India in the company of mighty travelers from China and Western and Central Asia, who came here in the remote past and left records of their travels. I thought of what India had accomplished in Eastern Asia, in Angkor, Borobudur, and many other places. I wandered over the Himalayas, which was closely connected with old myths and legend, and which have influenced so much our thought and literature. My love of the mountains and my kinship with Kashmir especially drew me to them, and I saw there not only the life and vigor and beauty of the present, but also the memorized loveliness of ages past. The mighty rivers of India that flow from this great mountain barrier into the plains of India attracted me and reminded me of innumerable phases of our history. The Indus of Sifidhu, from which our country came to be called India, and Hindustan, and across which races and tribes and caravans and armies have come from thousands of years. The Brahmaputra, rather cut off from the main current of history, but living in old story, forcing its way into India through deep charms cut in the heart of the northeastern mountains, and then flowing calmly in a gracious sweep between mountain and wooded plain, the Jumna, round which cluster so many legends of dance and fun and play, and the Gangas above all the river of India, which has held India's heart captive and drawn uncounted millions to her banks since the dawn of history. The story of Gangas, from her source to the sea, from old times to new, in the story of India's civilization and culture, of the rise and fall of empires, of great and proud cities, of the adventure of man and the quest of the mind, which has so occupied India's thinkers, of the richness and fulfillment of life, as well as its denial and reunification, of ups and downs, of growth and decay, of life and death. I visited old monuments and ruins and ancient sculptures and frescoes, Ajanta, Ellora, the Elephanta caves, and other places, and I also saw the lovely buildings of a later age in Agra and Delhi, where every stone told its story of India's past. In my own city of Allahabad or in Hardwar, I would go to the great bathing festival, the Kumbh Mela, and see hundreds of thousands of people come as their forebears and come for thousands of years from all over India to bath in the Gangas. I would remember descriptions of these festivals written 1300 years ago by Chinese pilgrims and others, and even Then these melas were ancient and are lost in an unknown antiquity. What was the tremendous faith, I wonder, that had drawn our people for untold generations to this famous river of India? These journeys and visits of mine with the background of my reading gave me an insight into the past. To a somewhat bare intellectual understanding was added an emotional appreciation, and gradually a sense of reality began to creep into my mental picture of India. And the land of my forefathers became peopled with living beings who laughed and wept, loved and suffered, and among them were men who seemed to know life and understand it. And out of their wisdom, they had built a structure which gave India a cultural stability which lasted for thousands of years. Hundreds of vivid pictures of this past filled my mind, and they would stand out as soon as I visited a particular place associated with them. At Sarnath, near Banaras, I would almost see the Buddha preaching his first sermon, and some of his recorded words would come like a distant echo of me through 2,500 years. Asoka's pillars of stone with their inscriptions would speak to me in their magnificent language and tell me of a man who, though as emperor, was greater than any king of emperor. At Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar, forgetful of his empire, was seated holding converse and debate with the learned of all faiths, curious to learn something new and seeking an answer to the eternal problem of men. Thus slowly the panorama of India's history unfolded itself before me, with its ups and downs, its triumphs and defeats. There seemed to me something unique about the continuity of a cultural tradition through 5,000 years of history of invasion and upheaval, a tradition which was widespread among the masses and powerfully influenced them. Only China has had such a continuity of tradition and cultural life, and this panorama such as continually of tradition and cultural life. Sorry. And this panorama of the past gradually merged into the unhappy present when India, for all her past greatness and stability, was a slave country, an appendage of Britain, and all over the world terrible and devastated appendage of Britain, and all over the world terrible and devastating war was raging and brutalizing humanity. But that vision of 5,000 years gave me a new perspective, and the burden of the present seemed to grow lighter. The 180 years of British rule in India were just one of the unhappy interludes in her long story. She would find herself again. Already the last page of this chapter was being written. The world also will survive the horror of today and build itself anew on fresh fountains. Fresh foundations. Thank you.